Hello, 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 and welcome back to the Wheel Talk podcast. We are back this week. We have finally the original crew back together. Gracie, Elvin. Gracie, hello.
Whoop whoop. Hey guys. I was just testing that sound out. It's terrible. I won't do it again.
I loved it. Please bring it back. Loren Rowney, hello.
Hi, good morning. It's been a while.
It has been a while. Too long, in fact. We do not have a world tour race this week coming up with the cancellation of the women's tour. There's a gap in the calendar now. So we decided to do a Q&A episode. We got a bunch of questions from the Escape Collective members, and we're going to try to answer as many as we can. We might have to do a part 2 because we got some really in-depth questions we're excited to answer. But before we get to that, this episode of the Wheel Talk podcast is made possible by the generous support of our members at the Escape Collective. Monthly memberships start at just $11.99 American dollars, or you can save 30% on an annual payment. For more information, head on over to escapecollective.com/join. That's escapecollective.com/join. We also, when we started the Escape Collective back in March, we launched with a lifetime membership option. And I am so excited to shout out a couple of the lifetime members who signed up from the beginning and have really made the Escape Collective possible and this podcast and us here today. Huge shout out to Chris Young, who I adore. He actually worked for our former podcast employers for a short time and was just instrumental in ad writing and is a huge fan of this podcast, and I'm a huge fan of him. So Chris, thank you so much for becoming a lifetime member. Libby Brown, who is in the US, is a massive supporter of the Last Best Ride and Jess Sarah and women's cycling, and I'm super excited that she's also come on board to support this podcast. Megan Hotman, who's the cyclist lawyer, an incredible lawyer who helps defend cyclists. The next 2 names, I really hope that I don't butcher them, so please forgive me if I do. Carl Wilhelm Alexanderson, thank you so much for your support. And Bodan Stepchuk, thank you as well. We're super grateful for all of you lifetime members for your support and for backing us. So thank you so much. And check it out, escapecollective.com/join. Just the escapecollective.com. We've got some great articles on there, and we're covering mountain bike, and this weekend is the next World Cup race, so that's pretty exciting. Should we try to get to these questions? We got there's a lot of questions, and they're not easy questions. They're in-depth questions. We're going to start off with the easiest of all of the questions, and that is from Natalia. Do you prefer dancing or singing? Please include the preferred rhythm in your answer.
I like it. I like that there's a couple of non-cycling ones in there. Loren?
I'm going to have to go with singing at the moment because I sing a lot of Disney songs to my child when he's a bit upset or something. I think that it's the main one. When he hears it, he gets a smile on his face, is the one from Moana. And I think I know all the lyrics, but I can't think of the title of the song. So I hope that's rhythm. That's definitely the tune.
I can think of the song in my head. Yeah, sing us a little snippet.
Nope. No one needs to hear that except Harry.
I feel like mine is gonna be everyone's gonna be like, ugh, when they hear my answer, but I love Taylor Swift. So.
Really?
She's doing her Eras tour at the moment, and there's a playlist on Apple Music, well, probably also other places, that's the set list for the tour, and I've been listening to that, and I can sing along to every song because it's mostly her hits and stuff, and especially in the car. I sing a lot in the car, and I told this to Matt yesterday on the Album Files podcast that the poor guy is going to hate me after the Tour de France Femme avec Zwift because I just cannot be in the car listening to music and not sing along. So I sing a lot. I don't have any rhythm. I cannot dance, but I am a huge fan of singing. I was in the church choir and everything growing up. So
so you can actually sing.
No, I can't, but I pretend that I can. I think I might be toned up.
You can sing a little bit.
Thanks, Loren. Gracie, what about you?
Well, I definitely cannot sing. In fact, one of my sister's boyfriends a long, long time ago, my sister and I were singing in the car, and he just has this shocked expression on his face. He's like, "Wow, I actually thought that all girls could sing like from birth, and apparently they can't. You guys are awful." So I think he thought that girls can sing as like they can't, like they don't poo either. So yeah, I'm gonna have to say dancing on that. I'm not a very good dancer either, but it makes me feel good, and I probably don't do it enough. I probably should do it more because it does make you feel pretty nice.
Man, what a wild thing to grow up thinking that all girls can sing.
I know.
Hence why
I
he's
laughed.
ex-boyfriend as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, boy, you've got some lessons to learn.
Yeah.
And I promise I won't be the easiest one.
All right, let's move on to some cycling questions. David asks, do you think we'll see World Tour riders retiring to race gravel in the same way that we've seen on the men's side? I don't think we're going to actually see as many women kind of transition to gravel as we have seen men transition to gravel. I feel like a lot of the women are doing both or are specific at gravel that haven't done road. I mean, obviously there's like Ruth Winder retired from road and she's in the gravel scene. But other than that, yeah, I don't know. I don't think that that's going to be a thing as much. I feel like women retire and like have babies. Obviously they have babies in the peloton too now, but I think that women retire and focus more on a career outside of cycling than try to like keep that professional career going with a gravel stint. What do you guys think?
I think like US-based athletes, maybe Australians too, I could see there being some interest if like you still have the joy and the love for the sport, but you just don't want to be competing in that high echelon anymore, that it is a nice way to exit the sport, to be honest. And I think the crit scene was a little bit similar in a sense years ago where, you know, if you still wanted to do another year of racing and just have some fun and still train and enjoy cycling on a competitive side, you could go to the US and race the crit scene and earn some good money in prize money. And I feel like now gravel, there's still that potential in terms of earnings, and you can enjoy racing your bike. So I can see it being attractive. Whether those athletes will pursue a whole nother career in gravel, it's really dependent. I know some people who just don't want to stop racing after they stop racing. So maybe it appeals to those athletes.
I always wanted to race crits when I retired. I had the unfortunate timing that I retired and then it was COVID the next year. But I feel like if it hadn't gone that way, that I would have definitely joined like a crit squad. Like racing Tour of America's Dairyland in the US, my second year racing was one of the highlights of my career. And I feel like going back to race the crit. I've also heard Corinne Rivera say multiple times that when she retires, she's just going to go back to crit racing with like the old UHC crew, try to bring them all back together, like Alexis Ryan and yeah, Lauren Tamayo. Such a good, yeah.
Salt and pepper.
Yeah, I don't really have much to add to that. I would agree. I think like we'll see some more for sure. And, you know, we're already seeing some doing both, like Tiff Cromwell. But I think, and some riders who have the intention to race more for fun, doing crits or gravel, I think that we'll see some more of those. It's a nice way to transition out of the sport, but in general I think you just won't see as many as in men's cycling, and that's purely because of the family thing or the career thing, because you're just not going to make that much money from sponsors or prize money in the gravel scene. It's getting pretty good really, but it's like I think females just struggle to either emotionally justify it. They feel like, oh, I need to do something serious, I need to keep, you know, my life on a certain trajectory, and feeling like you have to justify more fun, I guess, is difficult. There's no right or wrong there, but I think that some of us do struggle with that. And it's difficult to have kids and race. Like, hats off to the ones that are, but a lot of people struggle, even if you do have support. Like a lot of these gravel guys, they've got 2 or 3 kids and they're still training as much or more as they did as pros, and that's just not really doable for a female with kids, even with some really good support.
Would be a lot harder to justify, like, yeah, money wise. Dan asks, as women's cycling grows, what are the mistakes of men's cycling that can and should be avoided? And since we're not too far from the Giro and the Tour de France Femme avec Zwift, is the increase in team sizes for those races from 6 to 7 a good thing? Either of you want to take the first crack at this?
Oh, I think this is like a whole podcast of a question. It's like too many variables there. I think, like, for sure, for some things, it's great to have some equality there for men's and women's cycling. Like, for me, it was always like, oh, how could you not have the Tour of Flanders or Paris-Roubaix? Like, that'd be amazing to have, like, either A, at all, like Paris-Roubaix, or B, like, to have better broadcasting or on the same day or on the same weekend. Those events are just so big, they get such good crowds, it's like prestigious and exciting and great atmosphere, and then you're like, well, there's a lot of crap as well that doesn't work so well, like the calendar sizes, the calendar logistics, like stuff we have talked about in podcasts before about like what the whole calendar could look like, multiple calendars. And I think that one of the good things about women's cycling is it's a little bit easier to watch. It's a bit shorter. It's a little bit more punchy, maybe less predictable. I don't know. I think that's a really tough one to answer properly, because there's so many like pros and cons for lots of different things, and it's such an old sport in men's cycling. A lot of people get hung up on tradition, and I think even in women's cycling we can get sucked into the traditions that hold us back sometimes, and I think that's almost impossible to avoid some of those, the way that we do things, even if it might not be the best way.
I recently wrote an article on Escape Collective about the problems in the Women's World Tour, mostly around the system that we've spoken about on the podcast many, many times, but that there's no middle tier for teams, that there needs to be a pro team category. And I mentioned also that like the World Tour team should be required to race the World Tour races because like in my eyes, the situation with Ride London and Turingen was I guess unacceptable feels like a strong word, but a bummer to see. But I feel like I covered a little bit of this in that article. Just mostly like that there's a lot of issues in men's cycling with the calendar and races that have been going on for quite some time that they want to keep going, but it doesn't really make sense. Like the overlap of Paris-Nice and Tirreno Adriatico is, you've got like 2 World Tour stage races going on at the same time, and it's really hard to follow. And I think also that for men, because the calendar is so big, the teams are also huge, which means that it's really hard to follow like riders you love and stuff like that. I think for the women, we have smaller teams, which I think like teams will have to expand in the future. And I don't have a problem with 2 World Tour races going on at the same time if it makes more sense, like logistically. Like I wrote in this article about bringing back the Tour of California. I resurrected the Tour of California. And I wrote that I hope that teams would go to like Redlands Classic and Tour California, that the 2 were back to back, and that teams had like a block in the US, but it would have to overlap with the race like Paris-Roubaix Femme, because otherwise on the calendar, you just have nowhere to put it. And I don't think that the calendar needs to be pared back massively. I feel like this year's calendar seems huge, but actually, like in hindsight for cycling fans, it's awesome. And it's awesome in terms of there being more names for us to get to know, more riders that have potential. A problem I see with paring down the calendar is like riders like Rihanna Marcus, who've always been a worker have less opportunities to win a stage of the Tour of Norway and thus kind of put their name out there to be a leader. And now you've got her contesting the general classification at like the La Vuelta Femenina. So I feel like part of the beauty of cycling is that there are many opportunities, and I would not want to see those opportunities go. But I definitely think we're in a pretty good spot for women's cycling where we are relatively new as a sport. So like a lot of that tradition that Gracie mentioned, we don't have. And that means that there are a lot of things in the women's scene that could easily be tackled before they became bigger issues, like the calendar. We don't have a Dauphiné. We don't have Tirreno Adriatico. We don't have all of these week-long stage races that the men have, that they've been around for so long that no one's going to cancel them in order to make the calendar make more sense. But they also there is a lot of clutter going on. And I think we're dangerously close to getting cluttered, the women's calendar, especially if you add like Turingen into the World Tour and you've just got so much. And I think the biggest thing that the women can learn from is the men's calendar. So I think there's a lot that the women could take away from the men's to avoid some of the issues. And I think, the calendar is one of the biggest ones. But I also would like to see, I wrote in that piece that I would like to see the Tour de France Femme. Actually, no, we'll get to it. I'm going to leave that. I'll leave that thought for later in the podcast. But yeah, it's an interesting question. I think like in terms of teams going from 6 to 7 for the longer stage races, that makes a lot of sense, especially like when you have a longer race. It's pretty rare that a team finishes a race like that with all of their riders. And if you have only 6 riders for a 10-day race, it's really, there's a possibility you'll finish the race with like 1 rider, and that sucks for a team and sucks for that rider. So I think it's better in the long run for women to have 7 on the start line for races like that. This is such a huge question. We could make a whole podcast about it. Loren, what do you think? What's with the men's and the women's?
I feel like you guys covered all of it almost. You did a really good job. As best you could. Granted, we probably have 5 minutes for one question. I was just thinking about the whole money aspect, and we've spoken again about this. Like, if the risk of growing too fast is that there's several layers to it, but if we just look at the men's side, so their teams are really, really big because they, have commitments to World Tour races, and they have to fill these races with riders. And we know that the business model of cycling isn't sustainable, the current way that it functions. Sponsors coming in and out every few years. So I think with women's cycling, we're getting to a really good point now where some of the teams have got some really good financial backing. But I do wonder, and I guess this is a question that's going to come a bit later on with regards to a big sponsor pulling out, is, again, if it keeps growing too fast and we need a women's World Tour team of 20 riders at minimum wage traveling to all these races, how much bigger the budget is going to have to increase to. And I'm just thinking, I'm sure some of these World Tour teams are like just on their limits. So that's sort of the risk I see at the moment. Is it better to actually just have smaller teams and a smaller calendar and just build out the in-between, which is right now this continental level that doesn't really exist?
I mean, I think you make a really good point. So the biggest issue I see facing the men's sport and the women's sport, cycling in general, is the sponsorship model. Like there's a huge issue with none of the teams getting any revenue from TV coverage, and all of that money, like all of the revenue from the Tour de France Femme and the men's Tour de France obviously goes to the ASO. And there's like this massive issue with that because, for example, we have Silicon Valley Bank and Tibco have both pulled out of sponsoring EF Education, Tibco, Silicon Valley Bank. Anyway, that's such a huge bummer because like that team has been such a long running team in the US, and the management of that team have put in a lot of work to get to where they are now and get to the women's tour and now women's world tour. And now you just have that team collapsing because 2 sponsors pulled out. So the sponsorship model obviously doesn't work, but I feel like that is such a massive problem that is never going to be addressed. Like, I don't see the ASO ever being like, oh yeah, we're going to save cycling by giving the teams the revenue from the Tour de France. Like, that's just never going to happen. And so I feel like, yeah, if there was some other way, but this is something that people have been yelling about on the men's side for years and years, and it's never been addressed. And I just don't see it being addressed. I feel like if we're going to like save, no one can see my quotes on a podcast, women's cycling, it has to be addressed in other ways than budget, because that's just like, I feel like that is a losing battle.
That's a whole podcast.
Yeah. I just want to add one more about the 6 or 7 riders, and it kind of flows on from what Loren was saying about managing team sizes. And I think that ideally in the future would be good to have 7 riders in our quote unquote grand tours in women's cycling, but I think right now it's unnecessary, and in fact it increases the gap in the level of performance. So imagine SD worked with 7 riders, just as an example, versus everybody else. They don't need an extra rider, and it just creates a bigger gap between the ability of a team's performance between those best teams and those smaller teams. And we saw that in the Tour de France Femme last year, that big range of abilities in the peloton. And I just don't think that you need to exacerbate that. I think that the field size was good enough. Plus, we are seeing quite a number of teams the last couple of seasons already struggling to field full teams at many other races. And if they're thinking we need to make sure we can save 7 riders for the Tour de France Femme, maybe that is also affecting other racing.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. Maybe SD Worx should only be allowed to start 4. What do you guys think about, in regards to my article, what do you think about 2 of the points that I made, that the women's World Tour team should be required to attend World Tour races, and also that the Giro, Tour, and Vuelta should all be 10 days. If we're going to call them a Grand Tour, then they should all be the same distance. What do you guys think about those 2 points?
The Giro, the Tour, and the Vuelta, all 10 days.
Yeah, all 10 days.
Or
like all 8 days. Like they don't have to all all be 10 days, but I think they all should be the same length.
Yeah, there needs to be some bit more consistency there. It's just that it goes kind of all the way back into the calendar conversation of like, how do you make a coherent year that makes sense to logistics and the racing narratives that you want. And with the Tour de France Femme, it's also how that fits into the men's tour as well. Like, do you want it to finish on a Sunday, or does that not matter? Do you want it on the back of the men's tour, or does that not matter?
In my fictional calendar, I moved everything around so it was by region. So I had like the Italian one days, I had the Australia races in January, I had the UAE tour, and also the Chinese races, the Guangxi and Chongming Island. I put those in February. I didn't do research about weather in China in February, but this is fictional and it's never going to happen. So who cares about if it makes sense?
Abby's alternative universe.
Yeah. In March, I had like, in March, I had the Italian one days and also Drenthe in between the Italian one days and like moving into Belgium. So like Omloop, Bruges de Panne and everything. And then I kind of like built into the stage race season with Itzulia and Burgos leading up to the Vuelta, because then you get like this nice storyline where you have two smaller stage races leading up to the first like grand tour of the women's season. And then I had the same thing going through the summer, like building into the Giro. And then I had Tour Romandie building into the Tour de France Femme avec Zwift at the end of August. And then I had the Ardennes and then Worlds as the final race of the year. The reason that I moved the Tour de France Femme from July to August is because we have this obsession with the Tour de France in cycling, and everything builds up to the Tour de France. You're always talking about who are going to be the riders of the Tour de France, like what teams are going to bring, like what the course is, all of this stuff. But then after the Tour de France, those races all get forgotten. Tour of Scandinavia, completely like off everyone's radar. Everyone's cracked on cycling by the time you get to that race. And I think it's such an amazing race that just gets shafted because it's right after the Tour de France Femme. And so I moved everything around so that the Tour de France Femme was the final stage race of the year, like the cap basically on like an entire season. And then there was only like 4 race days before Worlds, and then the season's done. Nothing after Worlds. The Worlds is the final race of the year. It ends the season. There's no like forgotten races that happen in October, like the races in China. So that was my thought on the calendar, was that to move the Tour de France, then you don't have the post Tour de France slump. And with Worlds being the final race, then that's like a huge, like really exciting end to the season, rather than like these races that happen afterwards that no one wants to be at and no one wants to watch. Like Romandie last year.
I love the logic behind this calendar, I must say.
Yeah,
and I like the idea as a rider that Worlds was the last race, and you were just like, oh, yes.
Yep.
Yes, Noosa is coming. No.
Yeah, Loren, you and I have been in that room a few times. Thank fuck.
Yeah.
It's over. No more training days. This is the day before Worlds. This is our last training day.
Yeah.
Think about it.
Yeah. Good. I like that. But I do wonder if, I mean, we won't know because we've only had the Tour de France Femme avec Zwift once. So do you guys think that, you know, the build-up last year was great. There was a lot of hype around it. I always felt years ago when I was really into the men's Tour de France, like years and years ago when I was not even living in Europe, it was always like this sad moment when it was over, and I guess all viewers feel the same. Do you think that with the women's Tour de France Femme, that we've taken some of those viewers who want to keep watching a stage race because they're having like this slump, as you call it, Abby? Like, do we run the risk of losing those viewers, or do you think that there's a good enough gap in the calendar that even men's viewers of men's cycling viewers will also want to watch the Tour de France Femme? And then my other question is, will it cross with the Vuelta of the men?
I think they should completely change the whole men's calendar as well. So in my fictional world...
Okay, you're right. There we go. It makes more sense now.
Obviously, Loren.
In my fictional world, they've also moved the men's Tour de France to August.
Okay.
And then the same thing happens, because I think having the women's race right after the men's race is awesome. I was skeptical about it in the beginning, but I think it's fantastic. You have like so many fans virtually, but also on the roadside that follow both races. And I think it's just, I think it's awesome. It's going to be really interesting this year to see what happens with the women's race starting really far away from the men's finish. If that means that there's a lot less fans on the roadside, because I know last year, for people who were at the race, they saw a ton of people that had followed the men's race just like hop on to the women's race because it started the same in Paris where the men's finished. And so I think this year will be interesting to see what happens there, because the women's race is starting like a completely different part of France.
Where is the men's race finishing? Not Champs-Élysées, or was it the last time?
No, this year they still finish on the Champs, and then next year they finish in Nice because of the Paris Olympics.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I would love to know the number of retained what are we calling them? Viewers, attendees, like on the ground. And I just will add one more note, Abby, because I, as a full-time working normal person, our summer holidays in Europe pretty much, I think for most countries in Central Europe, the dates are around the same. So that's why as well that the Tour de France is in the summer holidays. So people can, just take their normal summer holidays. And that's basically revolved around when the children are on holidays. So August could work because the kids are still on holidays then. So I think that would be something to consider too.
Yeah, I mean, I think like in terms of climate change, oh God.
Oh, here we go.
Like changing the Vuelta to the first Grand Tour of the year wouldn't maybe be the worst decision on the calendar. Like it is brutally hot for the men racing the Vuelta in August or in like later August. And so seeing that Grand Tour shift to earlier in the year probably, and like look at the Giro, had horrendous weather. Yeah. With multiple, like this year, I think one stage was affected because of weather. I think last year, did we have 2 stages? One year there was they had to cancel. I don't remember. But anyway, the weather in Italy, especially in the Dolomites in May, is like not good. And so if they were to move those Grand Tours around, then there would be a much less weather impact on the race. We wouldn't have, like really annoying retired men who doped complaining about how the men nowadays are soft because they don't want to race in horrendous weather and like put themselves in danger. So, I mean, those guys would complain about anything, so it doesn't really matter. But yeah, I feel like moving Grand Tours around, especially as the climate changes, is not the worst thing.
Do you know what? We should get a vote from the listeners on this. If they're interested, it would be a really interesting conversation to have, because I don't know if anyone is really podcasted about this in the cycling realm, but we could get on an expert and actually talk about how climate is going to impact our sport in the next 15 to 20 years. And you could really dive into the calendar then, and just, I think it'd be a really interesting listen.
I agree. I think that'd be awesome. We could totally do that in like one of our off-season pods when there's no racing and we kind of do interviews and go off
tangents.
Yeah, lots of tangents. Anyway, I think speaking of tangents, we should go back to a question. How do you guys think?
Yes. To wrap that one up, we've got some good ideas,
but
we have no power, and it's not going to happen until a bunch of people retire from cycling.
Yeah. All right. This one is a funny question.
Is this the hot pants one?
This is the hot pants question. All right. Tom asks, he said, my wife and I are both very curious and not passing judgment. Riders should be allowed to wear what they find comfortable, but what's the deal with Chloe Duggart's hot pants? Is this something about comfort because of her leg injury? The leg and scar clearly seem to bother her still. And after she won the Ride London stage, she looked to be in a lot of pain. How big name of a rider has to be to how big of a name does a rider have to be to request a kit accommodation like that? Can anyone choose different inseam lengths? This one I found really funny, mostly because, well, I've been racing with Chloe since she got on a bike for the first time. So she's always worn her shorts like that. It's not a recent thing because of the injury. I think she just likes to wear her shorts incredibly short. And the reason that I wanted to put this question in here, there's 2 of them. One, I know there's been like when she was first racing on 2016, the US team, the DS would get mad at her because when she'd hike her bibs up that short, you can't see the sponsors on the bibs. So she actually got in trouble for that. And the other reason is because I do the same. Well, for me, it's a comfort thing. If the bibs are pulled really far down, then it like is pulling at my leg skin and I really don't like it. So I wear my bibs pretty high up as well because I like the loose fabric, that I feel like gives me more comfortable range of motion. And I'm a Velocio ambassador, and Olivia Dillon gets so mad at me because I've like hiked up the Velocio bibs really far, and she's like, that's not how you're supposed to wear them. So I did a photo shoot with Velocio like back in 2019, right after I retired, and she spent the majority of the photo shoot
pulling your pants down.
Pulling my pants down.
Look, I used to hike my pants up just during training rides because I didn't want the tan lines. So I used to adjust them during the ride. I will admit I've done that. But for racing, I always liked my necks like long. I don't know. It just felt better for me.
Yeah, I'm a long nicks as well, but I get that. It's a comfort thing. It's a style thing. Everyone's got their own style. The Italians are mad for like the bandana or the headband under their helmet, even in the middle of summer. It's like, yeah. So some people just get stuck on something that makes them feel good, and there's nothing wrong with that. That you can be so snobby in cycling, and there's no shortage of that. So certainly not judging either. And with the other part of the question, like how big of a name do you have to have that kind of accommodation? I think it's not so much your name. It's more like depends what team you're in and what the kit brand will want to allow. Like I was in Greenwich for most of the time, but we had a whole bunch of different brands across that time. And some of them loved feedback. They would give you whatever you wanted, and you could just make lots of little changes and whatnot. And other brands are like, no, this is what you're getting, and no custom stuff. So it's like, I'd assume that they've got a good brand and they
who makes the kit these
give her
days?
what she wants.
Rafa pulled out, right? Or not?
Yeah, Rafa pulled out of Canyon SRAM. They are wearing Canyon branded kit at the moment. But I remember like on HTC High Road when that team was around, Ali Stalker telling me that they all got like measured for their kits before like in October at October camp, the kit sponsor would come in and like measure everybody. So everything was super custom, and they all had their names in every single piece of clothing, like on the back of the collar and on the bibs and stuff, because it was all really, really tailored to the riders. So if you wanted shorter bibs, you just requested that in October and they gave you shorter bibs. But that's obviously like, yeah, completely depends on the clothing sponsor. I've also, like, I was on a team once where we all just got literally the same size, and I had to go and get all of my stuff tailored because I was like a climber, and so I was wearing massive jerseys that were just like in the wind, and I had to like go get all of my jerseys tailored. We only got 3 jerseys, so it wasn't like that big a deal. But, this was a UCI team, might I add. But yeah, it like totally depends on the kit sponsor. I think if Chloe is a big enough name and also like their best rider at the moment, I think if she wanted to have shorter bibs that still showed off the sponsors, she could probably call up Canyon and get that figured out. The second part of this question, also in relation to Chloe, was Tom said, I'm all for Chloe choosing her own path, but I was not at all comfortable watching her after her win at Ride London. If she was really in as much pain as implied, I wonder if that's the team's responsibility, or in that situation where she clearly couldn't even walk to the podium on her own. I think in Chloe's situation, for her injury, the team has obviously been really, really good about making sure that she's fit to race. They pulled her out of the Vuelta early in order to prepare for the races coming up and not to put too much pressure on her injury and her leg. And it's obviously something that she's going to be struggling with her whole career, and she's said that. And I think, like, as a fan, somebody also asked this in the Discord, like, should we be worried about Chloe? And I said, we shouldn't be worried. We as fans, like, we shouldn't worry about Chloe. We shouldn't worry about if the team is taking care of her. The team is going to take care of her. They're going to be asking her about how she's feeling. She's also got a really incredible team of people around her outside of the team that is going to be making sure that she's taking care of herself and that injury. So I think, yeah, like while it was probably uncomfortable to watch her walking to the finish, the way that her leg feels on the bike is probably completely different to how it feels walking. If you've ever done intervals and then walked upstairs, you'll know that the two are not. Cyclists can't walk upstairs. Like they can put out like 1,000 watts and they can't walk upstairs. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, and especially like watching Chloe be in so much pain after that race. You want to be you want to know that she's okay as a fan watching. I think the team is going to take care of her.
Yeah, I agree.
Oh man. Speaking of Canyon SRAM, should we address the doping
I guess so.
situation?
Do you want to say something?
I'll give a brief rundown. So on Sunday morning, just a couple days ago, as we're recording this podcast, the news came out that Sherry Bussett had tested positive for a breast cancer drug after she won a stage of the Tour de Normandy. In the press conference, her and her team claimed meat contamination, and said that she's innocent and she's not doping, and that they're going to do everything they can to clear her name, which is obviously going to be really hard for them. In the meantime, she's taking herself out of racing until a decision is reached. Yeah, I think this is a really interesting one because when it comes to doping, everyone claims contamination, even the ones who are definitely guilty of doping. And we don't know anything about the situation other than what's been told to the media. I think personally for me, it like really shocked me because women's cycling doesn't have the problem that men's cycling has had in the past when it comes to doping. We've had dopers. It's not like we've never been touched by doping, but it's just way less prevalent. And I think, yeah, like one of the questions that was asked to me was is this a testing thing that the women are getting tested more now? And I'm curious for you two, having raced in the top, like, did you guys get tested a lot when you were racing or not? Did you think that they could have tested more?
I don't think they test females less. I think that actually there's gender equality in this one area in sport, which is good. No complaining about that. And it's more about how competitive you are. I think it doesn't matter really about gender. It's about, what level you're at and how many things you're winning, I guess. Like Annemiek was tested all the time when I was her teammate, and I didn't get tested that much. So it was a little bit unflattering, actually, that I wasn't getting tested that much. But no, I would still get like a couple of randoms a year and a couple of race, either randoms or podium. So I think overall, I think for female cycling that it's not significantly less. It's probably the same or maybe a tiny bit less. But I would say that it's pretty much on par with men's sport.
Can I add something here? I do wonder about this, pleading contamination as the reason for coming up with a positive doping test. In Australia, we have a lot of education around doping and supplements and all kinds of things, and particularly when you're coming up through the different state institutes. And back in the day with Gracie and I, the Australian Institute of Sport, I was so fearful about contamination of products that like everything, if I took a supplement or a protein shake or something, everything had to be checked and approved on, I think it was the CIDA website, right, Gracie, or even a link through the AIS. So in terms of education, I think a country like Australia does really well in educating their athletes. Like, sometimes these things are in your control. And if you do go to the shop and you've run out of protein powder and you just decide to buy a random protein powder, there's always that risk if it's not approved, or I don't know what the different levels are here in Europe. But that was just something as an athlete I was very aware of and actually really scared of. And I wonder if in countries like Belgium, they do as much education. It was almost like I felt like the fear of God was put into me when I was younger.
It was the same in the US. Like, I went to a Talent ID camp and we had like an entire day where they were just like, don't take supplements unless you know exactly where they come from. The bottle could be contaminated, like all of this stuff. And every single team I was ever on also had like a 3-hour long spiel about contaminated products and only like take the supplements that the team gives you and stuff like that. And so I don't know. I mean, in this case, she's claiming meat contamination. Cause so I guess the cyclocross rider Toon Aerts, who tested positive last year, he tested positive for the same thing in the same region of France. He also has the same management as Sherry, so they're claiming that it's a meat product contamination that was eaten at the race. And obviously, like, she was tested because she won, and so we don't have tests from other riders who maybe ate the same meat. I don't know. I think it's really tricky. And I also think that this opens a wider conversation about how women's sport is growing, the salaries are growing, and thus are we going to have a problem with doping a la the men early 2000s? As there is more at stake on the women's side, which I don't know if we should even dive into that today. That's a yikes topic.
I think like it's just good to bring up. I really feel for her either way. It's awful. It's a nightmare situation for an athlete, and I think it's best not to speculate because we don't have all the information. So I think that we just have to leave it up to the experts and hope that it is a good outcome for everyone involved.
And if not, it's a lesson learned, hopefully.
All right. Martin asks, it would be good to hear your view on whether you think the SD Worx and Demi's dominance is good for women's cycling right now or not. Just going from one negative topic to the next. I personally don't think it's good. I love to see many different riders winning many different races in many different styles, but it's also cycling. It's not unique to women's cycling that one team and one rider is dominating. That happens in the men's all the time. So I don't think it's good or bad for women's cycling I think it's good for women's cycling as a sport because it encourages people to work harder to try to get on that level to compete. And it makes the racing more aggressive, more dynamic. But I think as a viewer, I don't love it. As a fan, I don't know. I love Demi. I'm a huge fan of Demi. I still would like to see, I don't know, Canyon SRAM, FDJ. I want to see FDJ win a World Tour race. So
yeah, I don't think it's a bad thing. It's obviously it gets a little bit tiresome sometimes, but I think like one of the reasons that we love to watch sport is because we love to have heroes, and often the heroes are outliers. Think of Michael Jordan, think of Serena Williams. Like, we're going to keep buying tickets to see those athletes because they're friggin' amazing. And sure, they dominate, but we still love to see it anyway. And I think that it's we want to root for the underdog too. And that's also like, it's such a hard balance to strike there of like, you know, being a fan of someone that is so good and then trying to be fans of people that are trying to win too. And I think that if you can beat SD Worx, I feel like that's even a bigger victory and that we can cheer for that as well. So I think like it would be nice to see a little bit more matched competition, but we've said it in previous podcasts, it's going to make everyone else lift. I think that there might be a few foundational issues that might be affecting this anyway, you know, like I don't want to suggest this as a real solution, but would a salary cap make a difference in teams to level out the talent and how they're paid? Slightly increase minimum salary, make a little bit of a salary cap, so that teams like SD Worx aren't just buying all of the talent, or not a salary cap, but like a team salary cap, I guess. So I don't know if that would help or hinder our sport at the moment, because we're trying to get everyone paid better and better. But maybe the fact that some teams can only pay minimum to all riders, and SD Worx is paying a lot to some riders, if not all of them, that's going to make a big difference, and that's pretty tough to overcome. So it's an economic kind of conversation as well as just a performance conversation.
That's a really great point. I think you hit the nail on the head there, actually. If we look at the composition of some teams, like I don't want to, Jacob Alula, for example. I feel like this year they've really underperformed, but they've lost a lot of, that core group of riders. Actually, since basically you retired, Gracie, it's slowly, we've seen them lose Annemiek and Spratty, and just some of the Sarah Roy is also gone. So that team, I know that they pay the minimum wage to all their riders, the men's minimum wage, which means that every rider on that team, I think Neopros still get the Neopro wage, and that's maybe why they also have so many new riders with no experience in Europe, is perhaps because of budget.
Yeah, I don't think a salary cap is the worst idea. I mean, that's been floated on the men's side as well as a way to counter UAE and Jumbo-Visma and Ineos, just like
buying everyone,
mopping the floor with everybody. Yeah. But yeah, the money problem in women's cycling is not something that we will. I think at this point, like, it's amazing that women are even being paid a livable wage. We never would have thought that possible when we were racing. At least I wouldn't have.
No, it's
my $8,000 a year.
But also, I mean, you can have women in the same race, and one woman is still earning, say, 10,000 euros, and the other is earning 300,000. That is,
well, this is why
the gap that we're talking about. That is a huge gap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is why there needs to be a middle tier. Like, continental teams should not be allowed to race World Tour races. They should have a World Tour race should be made up of World Tour teams and like 2 to 3 pro teams. Continental teams should be racing not against, it's like such a massive, and it's also dangerous, especially as the races keep getting faster and harder. You know how every year we have one thing that we talk about in every episode? And like 2 years ago, it was live coverage, and this year and last year, it's like, we need a pro team category.
Yeah. Pretty much we'll just never be happy.
Podcast will not exist. We're just content.
But also, I do want to point out that, like, it's not even that SD Worx has always been dominant. It's not that this is a new thing in cycling, because obviously it happens in men's, but like also it's not a new thing with SD Worx, because even before as Boels Dolmans, they still were buying up all of the best riders. I mean, at one point they had like Vos, Van de Breggen, Van Vleuten, like all on the team together. And so it's not like it's like a new thing for that team to be dominating. There was just a point in time there where other teams were able to rise to their level and buy up some talent and really challenge them, especially Trek Segafredo in 2019. And now they've just upped their game again. And we saw good things come from their dominance before in terms of the level of the women's peloton. And I think, yeah, we'll see what happens next, but there has to be good and bad, I think, in their dominance. It's a double-edged sword. All right. The next question, D asks, also, I don't know, some people have like usernames, and so I don't know what their names are. So I just went for a letter for this one. Any chance that we see the Women's World Tour races pushing over the UCI's distance limit? I I know longer isn't always better, but we spoke a little bit about this, I think, in the whole, like, should there be a women's Milan San Remo? And also, like, there was the one really long stage of the Giro in 20.
Yes. Yep. That's Lizzie
Banks one.
Yep.
And there was a pretty long stage in the Tour de France Femme avec Zwift last year as well. I think it shouldn't change.
That there's
No, I think
yeah.
this is a short answer. Longer isn't always better. And I think when they do include those longer stages, they do often get it right. Like, it is in the right tour and the right time. And quite often that's a day for, the break to go up the road and a chance for the breakaway people to actually have a chance at winning. And also it takes the pressure off people behind. So quite often, I think teams that are fighting for GC are happy to have that easier day.
But also, like, okay, maybe the UCI having a distance limit is stupid. But women's cycling is built on shorter, faster racing, and that's something I never want to see go away. I'm happy if there's 1 or 2 long races throughout the year, but no one wants it to change the way that women race their bikes. That's something that we have over the men that makes women's cycling more exciting.
Agreed.
And commentating for like 7 hours is...
I was going to say, Kirsty's never going to have to talk for 7 hours about women's. All right. I think we have time for like 2 more questions. There's one that I'll just answer really quick because it's easy. Why are all the women's races labeled Avec Zwift? There's only 2 races labeled Avec Zwift, and it's Paris-Roubaix Femme Avec Zwift and the Tour de France Femme Avec Zwift. And the reason that it's Avec Zwift is because Zwift is the title sponsor. This is a Zwift-loving podcast here. We love Zwift and what they've done for women's cycling. So I think, like, I get mocked at Escape Collective for always saying Avec Zwift whenever I say the Tour de France Femme Avec Zwift or Paris-Roubaix Femme Avec Zwift, because they always just shorten it. But it's like I think it's hard to overstate how much good Zwift has done for those 2 races and for women's cycling in general, and them being in the name of those races really is like the least that can be done to thank them for what they've done, especially with the Tour de France Femme Avec Zwift. I think, like, in a previous iteration of this podcast, Loren and I talked about how we were skeptical about that race, but with Zwift on board, we knew that it would be done properly. And actually, well, there's another question farther down about if the Tour de France Femme, Elo asks if there was a timeline for making the Tour de France Femme or Giro Vuelta longer than a week. And I went straight to the source and asked a friend at Zwift, Kate, if there were plans to make the Tour de France Femme Avec Zwift longer than it is. And actually, I'll just throw her answer in right here.
Hi, I did gather from the podcast this week that you're going to be at the tour. So excited. Great to have Rebecca Charlton on too. I love her. So regarding the race, absolutely the race is going to grow in the coming years. I can't say exactly at this point how many stages we'll add. The focus is on making this race the best race it can possibly be and growing it in a sustainable way. So we'll be, working with ASO and teams and riders to find out what the proper rate of growth is. But right now it's mostly focused on just building fans and building investment and building sponsors by making the current race the best it can possibly be. So yes, it will eventually add stages, and the dream is definitely a multi-week stage race, but we want to do that in the most responsible way possible.
So yeah, that's why there are women's races labeled Avec Zwift, because that's the title sponsor. Should we do one more and then wrap this up and come back to these questions next week?
Sure.
All right.
There's one that's like super long.
Yeah,
we'll save that. Save that one. I think we could just do like a short one. How late will the Girodonna leave it before publishing the race
Great
info about this
question.
year's race?
Great.
I like that
But I
before
mean, come on.
publishing useful information. You know what? When they finally publish information, it probably won't be useful anyway. Those profiles,
Yeah.
they always lie.
Yeah, sorry, Andy. We don't know. We don't have an answer for when the Giro's going to publish even the stages. I think there was a leak. The stages leaked, so they're out there in the world. But
Dark web.
oh man, the Giro is just. This is like classic Giro. Like,
Imagine working for
yeah.
the organization.
No, I don't want to.
Well, let's hope that it's a good race. But yes, it's not very well organized, just to put it lightly.
To be fair, the men's race is apparently also not super organized.
And isn't that organization meant to take over for next year?
Correct. Yeah. Maybe they're less organized than the current organization.
Look, guys, I just dealt. No, I'm not going to say it because I remember.
Say it.
No, it's just Italy. That's all I want to say, because even when I was in Switzerland for work last week, we were dealing with the Italian side, and the way they operate is just completely different to the way that we function in different parts of Europe. It's just like, it will all come together.
It'll be fine.
How are we going to get 19 mountain bikers up the mountain and then down safely with no guide? Yeah. I'll call some people.
They'll get there.
So, no, I think it's just, very Italian. Apologies to any Italians listening, but the best I can say is
they're probably, if we have any Italians listening, they're probably like, yeah. No, it is. This is an ongoing thing with the Girodonna, and the jokes about the profiles being just incredibly wrong is a thing that we've joked about for many years.
It's kind of funny when you're racing the race, funny and terrifying, because it's like it's the non-categorized climbs that create the fear. Because
if the profile in the book looks like a serrated knife, you know you're in trouble, because it's not little bumps that you're going to be riding over.
I'll never forget.
You're probably going to struggle to make time cut.
I think, that was me, the Giro 2015. We were like riding along the coast or like some massive lake, and the climbing started pretty early in the stage, and it was meant to be a pretty big day. And then we're climbing, and I was like, how much I turned to my best friend Carly, and I was like, how much longer is this first climb? And she just looked at me and she's like, we're not on the climb yet, Loren. And then I put my hand up and I was like, Gruppetto! Gruppetto! Anyone? I think I had 20 people sign up.
Nice. That's hilarious. All right. Well, we'll be back to tackle the rest of these questions because we have some really good ones coming up. So make sure to tune in next week. We'll wrap up this podcast with a quick, what are you obsessed with?
Oh, every week I forget to think about it.
I've actually got something I'm obsessed with. I'm obsessed with my new Specialized Levo SL mountain bike. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, that's what I'm obsessed with. Oh, and Shadow
That's
and Bone.
Oh, it's so good.
I watched that on my
Shadow
travels, and enjoying that.
Yeah. I'm curious what they're gonna. They like basically compress the second and third books into the second season of the show. I'm curious what they're gonna do with the rest. Like if they're gonna, because they changed the ending. I won't spoil it for anyone listening, but they changed the ending. So I'm curious what they're gonna do with that, because they've really, yeah.
Oh, wait, and I have one more. I actually have.
They're going off book. You're obsessed with
it's because I've been traveling alone. If anyone reads the Seven Sisters books, the final installment has come out. And the author, she sadly passed away from her battle with cancer, and her son has finished writing the book for her. So
I have been obsessed with baby clothes. Anyone who has kids knows that when your kid grows up, you get them a whole new wardrobe. So for the first like 2 years, it's like every 3 to 6 months, baby gets a whole new wardrobe. And so we were in Montana, and she was in her 6 to 12 month clothes, and we got back to Europe, and I had to change out all of her 6 to 12 month to 12 to 18 month, which I spend months accumulating. And then when I finally like put it into the drawers, I'm like, I have overdone it. She has a different outfit for every day of the month.
Your kid is like she's so well dressed. She dresses better than me. My poor
Yeah, me too,
my
man.
poor son, he dresses like Hannes and I, kind of like, I don't know, slobs in a way. Poor little Harry. All of this stuff is all vintage.
Since we live in Andorra, there's like some pretty nice like designer clothes that goes on sale because they have these massive sales. So she actually the other day she wore a Stella McCartney sweater.
Oh my God. I don't even own any Stella McCartney. not even Stella for Zara or Adidas or any of that. Like,
I can't afford it for me, but for Lila, it was on sale, so I got her a Stella McCartney sweater. But man, it's so exciting to like. I'm a huge fan of fashion and dressing, and so I get really into dressing her, and especially like in the first week of a new dress cycle when she has like a bunch of new clothes and I get to dress her in brand new things. It's really exciting. So I've been obsessed with washing and labeling all of her new clothes. Because apparently, like, did you know that you're supposed to wash your clothes before you wear them?
Yes.
Like when you buy new clothes, you have to wash them right away. And then
my mom told me religiously.
I had a baby.
But why?
Because of all the dyes and stuff, the poisons in the fabrics. So you should wash them. It depends where it comes from, obviously, but for most clothing, particularly fast fashion, you should wash everything, particularly undergarments, because obviously that's going directly to some sensitive areas.
And like Zara, if you buy Zara, for example, you have to wash it first. I didn't know this until I had a baby. So yeah, I spent like 3 days doing like 2 loads of washing a day.
Oh, God.
To be fair, that was also I like washed all of her old stuff and packed it away, which is like sad. But then you get to break open the Stella McCartney sweater and you're like, oh man, I forgot I bought this. This is really exciting. And then she immediately dribbled blackberry juice all over it.
Another reason I buy secondhand clothing.
But that is that's the problem. And also I think this is the last time that I accumulate new clothing for my child. I think like as you move into the walking, rolling in the dirt phase, it's less smart for them to wear. But she's still like she's still like relatively clean. So, but anyway, I've had a lot of fun with that. She's been doing the outfits of the day lately. It's been great. Gracie, what about you?
I'm obsessed with op shopping. So pretty much everything I wear most of the time is secondhand. So that's why I wash my clothes, because I just want them to smell a little bit better. But that's my like long-term obsession. Currently, I listened to the recommendation by Beck Charlton last week, and that was a good recommendation. So I'm definitely getting into that podcast. So you're going to have to listen back to that episode to find out what that was. And I also listened to another podcast. It was a quick series to burn through. It was called A Very British Cult. And I really enjoy listening to true crime, and I've been weaning myself off true crime because it's awful. It's not good for you. But I think listening to things about cults is still interesting and less bad, maybe. Anyway, it was really interesting, easy to listen to. And I think it's like, I think I've probably mentioned this a few times. I'm quite interested in psychology and how people's minds work. So I find anything to do with cults fascinating, because you're like, wow, how did that happen? But it's like a real good window into the human mind. And yeah, it's just interesting. So that was a good one.
I don't know about cults, but I would live on a compound.
Yeah.
With my favorite people in the world. I would move them all onto a compound.
I think that's getting a little bit more mainstream nowadays. Like, we used to really consider that as quite hippie or alternative, but I think that a lot more people are looking into that as a lifestyle, sometimes just for financial reasons, or say you're a single female and you just want to have a community around you with a child. So yeah, I think that's interesting too.
Thank you so much for listening. Thanks to you two for an awesome conversation. We'll be back next week to answer more of your questions, and then it's Tour de Swiss time as we build up to the Giro d'Onna, which will have daily coverage. It's very exciting. Daily coverage of the Giro.